You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 5th of August 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
For the time being, Europe, I think, has definitely passed this test.
But what was Europe's response to the influx of migrants from Morocco to the Spanish city of Ceuta? We'll explore Brussels' approach. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, Japan sells a military build-up as a win for the country's economy. We'll go through the country's latest defence white paper. And in the US, we've had another round of primary elections in 5 states ahead of November's mid-term congressional elections. Monocle's Chris Chermak is here to explain all. Good morning, Chris. What can you tell us?
Good morning, Emma. Another round of elections, this time focused more on Democrats, and a battle in Michigan between progressives and moderates to take on Donald Trump.
We look forward to that. Plus, we'll go through the papers and explore our summer essential read, Monocle's Med, Mountains and more. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. At least 14 people have been killed and 27 injured in a wave of Russian missile and drone attacks on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. A man has been arrested on a golf course belonging to the US President Donald Trump 2 days before Mr. Trump attended a fundraiser there. And the US has revoked the visa of Brazil's ambassador to Washington. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the influx of tens of thousands of migrants from Morocco into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta exposed arguably 2 things. First, that Europe is still irresistible to those who either wish to flee a better life or wish to flee from something worse. And secondly, the EU still does not behave as one when faced with this problem. Last week, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez came in for criticism for his government's response to the crisis. So could the EU as a group come up with a considered plan? Well, this is what the European Commissioner for Internal Affairs and Migration, Magnus Brunner, has been saying.
As you, of course, know, that these past few days were, I would say, a test of our European resilience on the one hand and of the security of our external borders altogether. We have just concluded our informal meeting of the Ministers of Interior on last week's events in Ceuta, and there was, of course, full solidarity with Spain around the table.
Well, to hear a little bit more about what happened in this informal meeting and to see what happens next, let's hear now from Dave Keating, who's a Brussels-based journalist, regular contributor to Deutsche Welle and France 24. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
So what was said at this meeting then?
Well, this meeting was really about damage control after a very embarrassing couple of days for the European Union. This was indeed a test, but I think most people do not agree with Commissioner Brunner that you heard there in the soundbite and think that the EU really failed this test for 2 reasons. The chief one being that they did not show unity. We still don't know exactly why nearly 80,000 people crossed the border very suddenly into Ceuta. There's a lot of suspicions that the Moroccan government was involved in that somehow. And yet we had the other countries of the EU blaming Spain for this, for reasons we can talk about a bit. But, chiefly this was the EU displaying to the world that when under attack, when coming under duress, when experiencing a crisis, European countries are more likely to turn against each other than to show a united face and try to tackle the problem together. And the second reason this was a failed test is this was resolved without EU involvement. Frontex, the EU's border force, did not come to Ceuta. This problem was solved by the Spanish authorities in cooperation with the Moroccan authorities. All the EU really did was complain about Spain. So in yesterday's meeting, they were very keen to use this word unity and solidarity over and over and over. But you can always guess when the EU Council is using a word over and over and over, it's out of sensitivity. It's not because they actually believe that word or they've actually displayed that word. It's because people can see that the opposite of the word is true. But it does appear that for the moment, they've kind of drawn a line under the crisis. They've turned down the rhetoric because we had some really, really intense rhetoric going on, particularly in between the ministers and prime ministers from Italy and Spain against each other. But both the Home Affairs ministers for both countries at this meeting yesterday were calm. They were trying to patch things over. So for the moment, everybody wants to put this incident behind them.
Well, they can't really, though, because they still have this. I mean, this morning there is reports that there is another surge of migrants. There's a sort of standoff at the Spanish-Moroccan border. So this is a problem that's not going to go away. But why is it that these nations? I think obviously last week the Italians lifted the Schengen agreement with Spain. Finland and Denmark backed Italy on this one. The Czech Republic wanted to back Spain's Schengen membership being suspended as well. So one wonders what the reasoning is behind all this, given the fact that these countries are not, dare I say it, directly affected by what's happening.
Indeed, this is about politics. This really was not a migration crisis. This was a political crisis. These countries wanted to use this incident because they are very, very opposed to Spain's recent decision to grant an amnesty to people who have been living and working in Spain for several years, to give them legal status. They're worried that this is going to act as a pull factor for migrants to try to cross illegally into the European Union. And so the instant that this crisis broke out, Giorgia Meloni, Italy's prime minister, and other people in her government wanted to use this as an example to say, look, we've been warning that the amnesty program will pull people into the EU, and look, that's what's happened here. I think as the days unfolded, it became clear that that wasn't really what was causing this incident, although it's still very unclear. But the political desire to score points against Spain kind of took over. And the context here is that Pedro Sanchez, the prime minister of Spain, is effectively the only leader from the left in the European Union. The European Union is dominated by center-right and far-right governments. And Sanchez is really standing alone these days in the European Union. He doesn't have allies because the EU is so conservative-dominated. And that's why we saw 22 out of the EU's 27 countries sign a letter effectively blaming Spain for the crisis. That really infuriated Spain. And, you know, it didn't escape anyone's notice that the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who is also herself center-right conservative from the European People's Party, seemed to be going along with this narrative at first, that this was Spain's fault. Now, all of those messages changed. That messaging changed over the past 2 days, where they suddenly pivoted and wanted to, I think they realized the damage they were doing to the EU's reputation and unity image. And so they've all pivoted and started talking about solidarity. But at first, the Commission President was really going along with Giorgia Meloni's narrative, even though the one violating EU law here was Italy. I mean, you cannot suspend a country from Schengen. It's not legally possible. You can conduct emergency temporary checks within the EU's passport-free Schengen area, but not against a specific country. You have to notify the Commission of an extraordinary circumstance, which means you need to do it, but then you need to conduct the checks on everyone. You can't just target a specific country. And the reality that the Italian government seemed to be ignoring here was the geography of the situation. Ceuta is effectively not in the Schengen area. There is an exclusion for these two Spanish exclaves that are in Morocco. They're surrounded by Morocco and the Mediterranean Sea. There is no way to get from Ceuta and Melilla to the Spanish mainland, to the rest of the European Union, without boarding a ship or a plane and showing documents that prove you have the legal right to be there. So there was never any real risk of people coming from Spain to Italy via Ceuta, via the Ceuta crossing. There are no flights from Ceuta. There's no flights at all from Ceuta. There's only boats that go to Spain. And yet the Commission, which is supposed to be the guardian of the EU treaties, seemed to be taking the side of the country that was messing around with EU law rather than the country that was experiencing the crisis, which was Spain.
Very quick question on what this does to the EU's long-term image, given the fact that it struggled in 2015 with the influx of migrants then. It struggled talking to each other when lockdown happened with COVID, and now it seems to be struggling here.
Yeah, I mean, this is very damaging, particularly, the EU's enemies will be watching this. The EU's enemies will be seeing the lack of unity. Again, we don't know exactly what caused this surge. There's strong suspicion that this was organized by Morocco as retaliation for the Spanish prime minister visiting Algeria, Morocco's enemy. They've done this before, back in 2021. If that is the case, then Russia, China, the United States, they can all see that if you attack one European Union country, if the leader of that country happens to not be very politically popular with the other leaders, then they're not going to have their back. And Russia will be taking notes. The United States will be taking note. Denmark was the second country to join in on that letter. Denmark was asking for solidarity from other EU countries when Greenland was under threat from the United States, when Denmark's territorial sovereignty was under threat. And yet Denmark was not willing to show that same solidarity to Spain when Spain's territorial integrity was under threat. The world will notice that. The world will remember that. It's a pretty bad look for the European Union.
Dave Keating, Brussels-based journalist, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. 15:11 in Tokyo, 7:11 a.m. here in London. Now, what is the best way to persuade your citizens to accept an increase in defence spending? Well, if you are Japan, it is to try to not only tell them they will be more secure as a country, but also to say it'll make everyone more prosperous. Well, let's hear more now from Alessio Patalano, who's a professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence, who joins us today from Singapore. Good afternoon, Alessio.
Good afternoon, Emma.
Good to have you with us. Alessio, just run through what's in this white paper, would you please?
I mean, first of all, let's say that the white paper in Japan is a bit of a yearly occurrence. Every year, this publication guides the predominantly those who are interested in defense. It's a well written but also very detailed document, several hundred pages long, that introduces what Japan is doing. It's part of Japan's approach to a transparent, if you want, logic on explaining what defense is about, why Japan needs defense capabilities, and how it intends to procure them to address what kind of threats. So this year, however, so there is an element of continuity. Because it comes out every year, you can also compare the type of changes, both in terms of the type of challenges that Japan is facing, as well as how the priorities, if you want, are identified. And this year is peculiar because the previous a couple of years, the cover, the style had become much more serious, even to some extent almost sort of darker, with drawings that inspire a sense of like security is in a much more sort of severe condition. This year, however, there was a significant change because the pamphlet that has been published just ahead of the main publication is a very different cover. It's got manga style, young people sort of sitting on some stairs, sort of talking about defense. And there's a very conscious choice. If you look at the introduction by the current defense secretary, Defense Secretary Koizumi, he makes very clear that this year he wants to bring defense to a much broader audience. And in part, that's because Japan is shifting its approach. Defense is not going to be just about the self-defense forces. It's going to be a whole society approach. And that will have sort of implications in the way in which the money is spent. So there's a lot more emphasis about societal engagement with defense, as well as the idea that defense industry now is becoming a core pillar of that overarching overall approach to defence.
So will this societal benefit and these manga covers and this persuasion that this is actually going to be for Japan's long-term benefit, is it all going to work?
So this is the question that remains out there. Now, it must be said that defense, like in any country, in Japan is not the sort of thing that wins elections. However, we do know that in the last snap elections, the current Prime Minister Takaichi, was just weeks ahead. She had been very clear about the security landscape, for example, the impact of potential scenarios that have consequences for the livelihood, the economic stability of Japan, and would see Japan having to take a position on the matter. And notwithstanding that, she managed to secure a considerable majority at the election. That would suggest that, as a general proposition, defense is much less of a taboo in Japan than it used to be the case. And Defense Secretary Koizumi himself, younger person, son of a very popular Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, also is projecting an image of a significant sort of wider engagement, multilaterally with other countries, but at the same time nationally, putting an emphasis persistently on the work that the self-defense forces do. So that's changing the relationship. And so we might be facing a situation whereby there is much greater acceptance for increased defense spending, and there is much greater acceptance that is, there is a place for everyone in society in managing defense. So we'll have to see. But at the moment, the strategy at least is in place. And of course, this year, by the end of this year, there will be three new documents: a national strategy, a national defense strategy, and then a new defense investment plan, as it were, that will then reformulate what at the moment is the positioning of this new narrative.
Very briefly, Alessio, what is the end goal in this one? What does everybody want the Japanese defence organisation to look like in 10, 15, 20 years?
I think it will be a much more sort of rooted into the core economic fabric of the country, and it is going to be a force that will have much greater capabilities in terms of long-range counterattack strike capabilities, as well as autonomous and automated capabilities. So a force that is going a trajectory that worldwide we've seen taking the shape on the back of the latest wars, but also one that will be much more sort of central to the societal understanding of what national security is all about.
Alessio Patalano, Professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Singapore. Still to come on today's programme.
I like to look at my paintings, and I know that they are finished when I feel grounded, when it's like a velvety surface that I feel that I can go inside of it, like it's calling me.
Now, that was once the lead singer of Brazilian indie pop band CSS, but now she's focused on her main passion of painting. We'll hear more from the musician turned artist, Luisa Matsushita. Stay tuned to The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, and obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Just nudging 7:19 here in London, but 8:19, which is where we head now, to our Zurich studio to hear from Emily Isahar, who's the Managing Director for Peace Mediation at ETH Zurich. Busy. Emily, you're doing the paper review for us. Good morning, and how are you?
Good morning, Emma. Good to hear from you. No, things are well in Zurich. Rather hot. Another hot sunny day ahead of us, unfortunately.
Oh, you poor thing. How are you going to cope?
I think a dipping in the lake is what the doctor has ordered.
It gets worse by the minute. OK, tell us, before you have to go and put yourself through that terrible time, what have you spotted in the papers, Emily?
So why don't we start in Finland with Helsingin Sanomat that reports on two stories related to Ukraine. One is a shooting. A Russian soldier in the Russian-occupied Crimea opened fire on his own unit and then shot 3 civilians in the nearby village of Klemenitske. And the soldier has been detained and the motive is under investigation. So that's one story. And the second story Helsingin Sanomat reports is Ukrainian drone attacks hitting at least 3 Wildberries e-commerce warehouses, and reportedly by now Ukraine has destroyed roughly 17% of warehouse capacity of Wildberries, which is Russia's answer to Amazon.
Indeed, because this is now a new approach by both the Ukrainians and the Russians, isn't it, to send longer range missiles and also to target each other's infrastructure.
Absolutely. So both sides are, in a way, normalizing deep strikes far away from the front line. So logistics and civilian infrastructure, not just military positions, are now routine targets on both sides. And that, of course, can raise the civilian toll structurally and not just episodically. But Kyiv's argument is that Wildberries warehouses are, for instance, being used to store and distribute supplies for the Russian military. So they're not used purely for civilian logistics. This is, of course, an argument Moscow adamantly denies, and this points to the difficulty with dual-use infrastructure. So it's hard to kind of vary in a watertight fashion to verify these incidences, but it is indeed a bigger trend in the war.
And indeed, this Russian soldier opening fire on his own unit that you mentioned about from the Helsinki Sanomat, what does that actually say about what the war is? What's happening in the war?
It's interesting. So it's it perhaps is not significant as a single story, and it's maybe less interesting for what it tells about Russian strategy, but it is interesting perhaps as a data point on the strain and discipline within Russian forces stationed in occupied territories. So it's worth watching whether this becomes more of a pattern or a trend, as we also see more reports on perhaps war fatigue also on the civilian side in Moscow and St. Petersburg and elsewhere. So again, as a single incident, it's perhaps less important, but if it becomes a broader pattern, it's interesting to watch.
Let's move on to the front page of the Swiss paper NZZ. There's an article about, well, let's sort of move completely into your area of expertise. We mentioned there Russia, but also we have the longer term issue of Swiss neutrality, and there's a big discussion about it on the front page.
Exactly. So the Swiss voters will go to the polls later in September on the 27th. And one of the things they get to vote on is the so-called neutrality initiative, which has been launched by the Swiss People's Party, so the right-wing party here, and the pro-Switzerland group. And this initiative would write quote-unquote permanent armed and integral neutrality directly into the Swiss constitution, and practically this would mean that Switzerland could not join sanctions that haven't been explicitly authorized by the UN Security Council. So this would, for instance, apply to the EU sanctions against Russia that Switzerland has joined, and it would also bar Switzerland from cooperating with military alliances, which would put into question Switzerland's current NATO security cooperation and participation in EU defense projects. So NZZ has two interesting pieces today. One is an interview with Christopher Blocher, former Swiss federal councillor, and really the main driving figure behind this neutrality initiative. And coupled with that, they have their own editorial, which focuses on Russian interference or explicit support for this initiative.
It's an interesting article, isn't it? Because it talks about the context of all this and what Russia is trying to do when it comes to influence in Switzerland.
Exactly. So Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova from Moscow has publicly endorsed this initiative on Telegram earlier this week, which was very strategically timed to coincide with the start of this initiative's campaign this week. Her justification, or Russia's justification, is that Switzerland stopped being neutral once it began adopting EU sanctions against Russia after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This is, of course, a claim that NZZ, the newspaper itself, rejects, noting that Switzerland is acting with its own existing neutrality law and the UN Charter's self-defense provisions. The Russian embassy has also, the embassy in Bern, has separately criticized the scope of the Swiss government's foreign policy powers more generally, suggesting that Swiss voters should rein in their own government, implicitly thereby kind of cheering on this initiative. So it is becoming a broader issue, also in the context of upcoming elections in Germany, in a couple of eastern states and Berlin, where the pro-Russian AfD, or Alternative for Germany, is projected to win big. So one, and NZZ speaks about this, suggests a coordinated effort by Russia to try to help Russia-friendly political forces across Europe, not just in Switzerland.
Let's move on to another article that you wanted to bring to our attention, also in the Helsinki Sanomat. I'll back off to Finland. By all accounts, and forgive me if I'm incorrect here, the Finns have had an absolute stinker of a summer. You've not had anything further than about 13 degrees and it's been cold and rainy. That notwithstanding, there are warnings about the scenes that we have seen in Spain and in the west of France, replicating up further north.
Absolutely. So Helsingin Sanomat has an interesting piece about whether we could see these border-style fire disasters in Finland. And as you mentioned, Finns tend to take comfort in the fact that our summers are cooler, they're wetter, so that should protect us from these southern European-style fires. But as this article and the researcher interviewed therein suggests, that assumption is no longer accurate. So yes, there is a real and growing risk of big wildfires in Finland, and it has a lot to do with the fact that in Finland we have a lot of drained peatland and commercial forest sitting on top of drained peatland, which is quite similar to what we've seen in Bordeaux. So there was a big effort in the 1960s in Switzerland to ditch bogs and wetlands for commercial forest, and that creates a big risk. So peat is the danger, it burns slowly and deep, and it's very hard to extinguish once it's alight. So fires can smolder underground for months, which is actually what we are seeing currently in France as well, where the kind of on surface fires have been put under control, and they're trying to ascertain that underground fires are not continuing.
Finally, while people are dealing with that, the Finns are going back to work already when most of, let's say, southern Europe has just packed up the bags and has headed to the beach. There's a brilliant article about sort of Finnish mental welfare, about how you recalibrate your brain having had a little bit of a rest.
Exactly. It's a hilarious story on two accounts, exactly. Finns are coming back to the office and school while other Europeans are just starting their Ferragosto. And secondly, because Finns do tend to take relatively long holidays, so their brains need to be rewired back to normal, regular office routines. So Helsingin Sanomat interviews the district psychiatrist chief from the Helsinki University Hospital, who argues that based on research, it is a genuine cognitive transition, not just laziness or reluctance, to struggle when you come back to the office. And the key thing relates to routines and advanced decisions. So on holiday, people stop making these advanced decisions and they live more freely, emotionally and spontaneously, which is good, but that makes returning back to work difficult when you need to reprogram yourself back into routine-based functioning. So again, that is a big transition for your brain.
Emily Isahar, using his brain, Managing Director for Peace Mediation at ETH Zurich. Thank you so much for joining us from our Zurich studio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now here's a look at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. At least 14 people have been killed and 27 injured in a wave of Russian missile and drone attacks on the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. There's been an increase in long-range attacks between Ukraine and Russia, with each side targeting the other's infrastructure. A man has been arrested on a golf course belonging to the US President Donald Trump. Agents say it happened 2 days before Mr. Trump attended a fundraiser there. The man was reportedly found with ammunition and a firearm in his car. And the US has revoked the visa of Brazil's ambassador to Washington. The move follows a refusal by the Brazilian government to grant visas for 2 US officials who tried to visit last month. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, yesterday saw another round of primary elections in the United States as the two political parties set their candidates for the mid-term elections in November. Democrats are hoping to retake Congress, but are wrangling over their own direction and identity to get there. To fill us in, an update now from Monocle senior news editor Chris Cherma. Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Good morning, Emma. Good. How are you?
Absolutely fine, and key to find out what happened in the primaries. So just explain to us where the battle lines lie and what's been happening.
So, yes, just for a bit of background maybe to start, this is a battle for the Democrats in particular and their identity. That's what we're seeing play out once again yesterday, or, still going on, if you will, into the early hours of the morning in the United States right now. It's a battle between progressives and moderates. Democrats have been out in the wilderness, if you will, for the last 2 years with Donald Trump in power and Republicans controlling the Senate and the House. So they are trying to figure out how they can get back into power in November's congressional elections. But in so many different states, there is a debate about how to do that. Should you go more hard left, confident in your policies, even socialist in your policies, or should you be appealing to the middle with moderates? That's the key that we're seeing from yesterday and so many other primaries.
So looking at that, I think there were 5 primaries yesterday, weren't they? Who is currently winning this battle between progressives and moderates?
So it is a mixed bag. There were lots of primaries yesterday, but the focus is on Michigan. This was the key one. There were a lot of primary races yesterday in Michigan. And I say a mixed bag because you take the key race, the Michigan Senate race between a progressive and a sort of moderate as well that you've had there. You've had Abdul El-Sayed. He's from Michigan, born to Egyptian parents, long career in the health sector. He is the progressive. He's calling for Medicare for all, so more of an NHS, if you will, style health system against congressional representative Haley Stevens, who's trying to make the step into the Senate. Abdul El-Sayed had been extremely confident going into this, and now the results are very, very close. They are still counting ballots. It's not clear who's going to win. In other cases, you've had a congressional race as well for the House of Representatives. There, a progressive has won in William Lawrence, but even that is only because the moderates have split their vote and there were 2 candidates running against him. So it shows kind of that there's this mixed bag in these races. One more to mention as well, separately from that, that's been interesting in Kansas, and I think this highlights one of the challenges. You've had a sort of leftist populist in Cindy Holscher winning, defeating Ethan Corson, who was backed by the governor, who is Democratic in Kansas. Surprise, surprise. Some listeners might be surprised to hear that, Laura Kelly, but showing that even in a state where Republicans generally do well, you're seeing a more leftist populist win.
Just going back to Michigan and to the former public health official Abdul El-Sayed, they're still counting, so the votes are not in, but he was saying that he wished he was declaring victory, saying there is so much more that unites us than divides us. What you have just said suggests otherwise.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, you have seen this, obviously, when it comes to even New York Mayor Mamdani and others. Their rhetoric is one of unity, but their policies and their prescriptions are certainly more to the left. And so, yes, they are trying many times with their speeches to focus on unity and this kind of rhetoric that you're hearing from El-Sayed as well. But the reality is that there is this strong debate within Democrats about what the right policy prescription is to take on Donald Trump. This should be an election in November that they are going to win. If you look at general polling, approval ratings for Donald Trump are extremely low. Approval ratings for Congress are low, as they often are. This is a time for Democrats to take back control. But the question is, how do they do that? Is it the approach of someone like El Sayed, who has been, as I say, very confident, but then might face a challenge in a state like Michigan, which again is one of these interesting states, working class in many ways. It has become a battleground, used to be heavily Democratic. Now it is a battleground that Democrats generally do a little bit better in, but that's the big question.
And what does this say about the ability of the Democrats to actually make a significant mark in the midterms in November?
In short, they're not going to make a significant mark. I think that's fair to say. They might eke out a victory, but I think American politics at this moment are incredibly divided, and then politics within the two parties are incredibly divided. You've seen this same question between MAGA Republicans, if you will, and some more moderates play out on the Republican side as well. So both parties have this split within them. On the Republican side, I'd say it's a little clearer towards MAGA and Donald Trump, despite everything that's been happening and sort of the lack of approval ratings for Donald Trump. On the Democrats, we're still really right in the middle of this. So that's why I think we're seeing this significant split. And then the question will be, how does that play out in November? I think you're going to see, as a result of some of these wins from populists, from left-leaning candidates in Central America, those are races that Democrats might lose. And so that will be a lesson for them as well. But obviously the big test will be in a few months.
Chris Cermak, Monocle Senior News Editor, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist. A quick look now behind the headlines. Here's Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller on Sweden's new strategy for psychological defence.
In October 2024, every Swedish household, more than 5 million, took delivery of a bracing pamphlet entitled In Case of Crisis or War. It wasn't the first time Sweden's government had published such a thing. The tradition dates back to 1943, as Sweden sat out the war then consuming the rest of Europe. But the latest edition acknowledged lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that Sweden was no longer a neutral country, but a member of NATO, and therefore committed by treaty to the defence of 31 other countries. Sweden has taken another step towards making flesh this spirit of resilience with the announcement of its first national strategy for psychological defence. The first of the 4 pillars of the new strategy for psychological defence is work against undue influence of information. Sweden has, like pretty much every other Western country, whether those countries understand it or believe it or not, been a regular target of Russian disinformation campaigns. Not coincidentally, in 2022, Sweden's Ministry of Defence established a psychological defence agency tasked with resisting foreign influence operations. The Russian threat to Sweden has since grown somewhat more sophisticated and aggressive. In the last couple of years, Russian hackers have targeted Swedish digital services and energy infrastructure, but disinformation campaigns are ongoing, and why would they not be? They're cheap, easy, deniable, and so long as people remain eager to consume whatever nonsense reinforces their prejudices, effective. The National Strategy for Psychological Defence is part of a minor blizzard of related initiatives from Sweden in recent weeks. Sweden has also announced the creation of a new foreign intelligence service to be known as the UND, its first national strategy for ensuring security of supply, and its intention to increase access to civilian shooting ranges. Sweden's European neighbours and allies may chafe somewhat at any suggestion that they take lessons in this sort of stuff from a country which hasn't fought a war since a minor scuffle with Norway in 1814, but we should. Sweden is taking commendably seriously one of the most basic principles of resilience, military and otherwise. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. You're listening to The Globalist. And if you want to hear more opinion like that, well, sign up to our daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute. Monocle.com/minute is where you go. Time now for a quick roundup of the news coming out of the Middle East. Ruth Michelson is a Middle East correspondent writing for The Observer and for The Guardian, and also for us here at Monocle. She joins us on the line from Istanbul. Good morning, Ruth.
Good morning, Emma.
Let's talk about business, but with diplomacy as well, and all eyes on the Straits of Hormuz and whether Iran will open it up fully.
Well, yes, whether Iran will open it up and as the US wants. Lots of positive noises coming from Donald Trump and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, saying that there has been progress in talks on the Strait. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that there could be an agreement in the coming days. But when we actually look at what appears to be on the table, first of all, Iran has not said that they are even indirectly in talks with the US. And this is an emerging agreement that, as the New York Times said, that if this goes into effect, it will come at a high price for the US, and it would appear to basically cement Iranian control over what was previously an international waterway. The nature of this agreement appears to be that Iran would control one part of the strait and Oman would control the other. So basically the Iranian part would be used for traffic in one specific direction into and out of the strait, which gives Iran an enormous amount of control. And that it's not really clear what the US is getting out of this, or if this will free up and open the waterway, as Donald Trump claims. It has caused oil prices to sink, though, and so that is likely good for the US in the long term.
Now let's move on to Israel and Lebanon. They're deep into their seventh round of talks, mediated by the United States, this time in Rome. The business mood there is must be what, given the fact that this has been, what, the seventh round?
This has been the seventh round. This is also something where, as you say, the mood is not exactly great towards these talks. A huge amount of criticism directed at the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun for engaging in the talks at all. The purpose of them is supposed to be agreeing on more of these pilot zones where you would see a phased Israeli withdrawal from areas in southern Lebanon. But as Al Jazeera is pointing out, even as these talks are going on, we are still seeing Israel destroy areas of southern Lebanon, destroy homes and buildings across parts of southern Lebanon. And so even though this is supposed to be a ceasefire agreement, it is, first of all, it's not being obeyed by one party, but also it's the other party to the conflict, Hezbollah, are not at the table. And there has been criticism of these talks also from the Hezbollah leader, Naim Qassem, who said that these direct negotiations will bring nothing but shame, humiliation, and successive compromises for Lebanon.
Quick look now at what's happening where you are. Istanbul prosecutors are investigating a journalist for comparing Recep Tayyip Erdogan to Franco. This will not necessarily end well for the journalist.
No, unfortunately not. He is the latest. This is Ertuğrul Özkök, who is a former, very highly influential journalist, former editor-in-chief of Hürriyet, one of Turkey's largest newspapers, who made these comments on a YouTube channel and is now being investigated for criticizing the president. He is probably somewhere in the. It's hard to total up the number of people who have been investigated or even jailed for insulting Erdogan. Human Rights Watch had a stat that from 2021, as of 2021, there were 11,000 people who had been detained for these reasons. There's also a stand-up comedian who was detained and has just published a letter from prison after 1 month in detention for being accused of criticizing the president in his stand-up set. So I agree, it doesn't look like things are going well for that particular journalist.
Ruth Michelson, Middle East correspondent based out of Istanbul. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Let's head now to Sao Paulo to talk about an upcoming exhibition of new paintings by the Brazilian former pop star Luisa Matsushita. She's known as the lead singer of Brazilian band CSS. But in recent years, she's preferred the artist studio to the recording studio to pursue her real passion of painting. Well, this month her work is on display at Sao Paulo's Teatro Cultura Artística, and Monocle Radio's Fernanda Augusta Pacheco caught up with her, who began by telling us just why she quit singing.
You came to show your mad love. You came to tell it's not enough. Come and erase me and take me with you. Kiss me, I'm drunk, but don't worry, it's true. I wanted to show you how mad is my love. Come and attack me, it's not gonna hurt. Find me, deny me for fear and a close. Let's make a love and listen that from above. Let's make a love. Let's make a love and listen that from above.
In 2013, I was about to turn 30. And I realized that people knew me as a singer, as a front woman, which I love being a front woman, but singing is not like my strongest talent, you know? And I had an epiphany that I needed to paint. And I don't really know where that came from because I never painted. Because for a decade or more than a decade, I didn't have the space for it. So I started painting. I was living in New York. And yeah, I've been painting since 2013. And in 2023, I was discovered, just like how models used to be discovered in malls, you know? I was discovered as an artist at a bar by Kiki Mazzucchelli, who's curator at Aberto. And I was at a bar talking to a friend of hers, and then she later asked, like, who is that? And Kiki is an art curator for like 30 years. And then she saw my paintings on my Instagram. And then she asked me to see my work. And then we started working in 2023. And then I was like shown in a more direct way to the world. Because before then I was doing small exhibitions, you know, like by small galleries. I was in a more independent underground circuit.
How would you describe your art? And do you think your career as a musician before influenced that somehow? Or was it definitely a big break and maybe they have nothing to do with each other?
I'm a very anxious person. And I think I want to bring to my painting what I lack, which is some sort of plenitude and harmony. I like to look at my paintings and I know that they are finished when I feel grounded, when the surface of the painting is not reflecting back to me, when it's like a velvety surface that I feel that I can go inside of it, like it's calling me. And it's an abstract shapes with hard edges, with organic shapes. And I feel that my music career, you know, like making music, it did help me with editing. Because in music, I was quite insecure. It was the thing that got me to make so many dreams come true, like to see the world. And the band was very fun and ironic, but I'm very serious about working. And I wanted to show that I was working. So my lyrics are so long, you know, like there's no negative space in my music. So when I got to painting, I was 30 years old. And I thought to myself, I don't want to get my insecurities in the canvas, you know. I will handle my insecurities some other way because I do want the negative space at this time in my work.
That's a beautiful way to describe it, actually, this kind of negative space. Because it's true. I mean, the lyrics I remember from CSS, it's a lot. Let's make love and listen that from above, you know, like, wow, you know, I love it. And I did ask that question before because this new exhibition that you're doing with Aberto, which I want to know at all, in Portuguese it says, tudo que eu sei eu aprendi à noite, or all I know I learned in the night, right? So is that work perhaps when you lived in São Paulo, in downtown, going to clubs, was that part of that influence?
Yeah, the title of the exhibition, it's like everything that I know, I learned at night. And the location of Teatro Cultura Artística, the theater that I'm going to do this exhibition with Aberto, it is in near Rua Augusta, the Augusta Street I think it represents Brazil a lot. It starts downtown. Sometimes it's very decadent, and sometimes everything is happening. And then it goes to Avenida Paulista, and then it ends in one of the richest neighborhoods of Brazil. So you got the 1% and the other 99% in Augusta Street, which is really near the location of the theater. The theater is in the downtown part. And something like curiosity about Rua Augusta, I think Nick Cave lived at Rua Augusta at some point in the 80s. So that location reminds me a lot of my first time in São Paulo, because I lived at Rua Augusta. Rua Augusta is also the street of the red light district of São Paulo. I mean, there are a lot of red light districts in São Paulo, but that street is known for that. So I lived in there when I was 19, and I did not know what Rua Augusta was. I knew that the rent was cheap, and that what made me go there. But the first night there, I realized. But also with the noise, all the clubs were there too, like the indie rock clubs and the shitty clubs and the amazing clubs like Xingu, like glamorous disco club. And that area reminded me so much of it. So I could not separate the theater location from the location. So that's why the exhibition became this looking back at the start of this nightlife and everything that I know that significantly changed my life. I did learn at night, I met those people at night. And the night scene, it is a place where you can do trials and demos of yourself, of what you want to become. And then it goes to the daytime, and then you become that person. So the nighttime, it is so powerful, everything that happens at this time of the night.
Why is that we stand so still? People gonna start thinking we're statues. Silence is disturbing me. People talk but I can't hear. I'm off the hook.
And that's Luisa Matsushita talking to Monocle Radio's Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And Luisa's new exhibition opens on the 15th of August in Sao Paulo. You're listening to Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
Finally on today's show, August marks what many call the silly season when it comes to news. It's a time when the senior editors have set sail on their holidays and the less experienced hands are remaining on the news tiller. The news, as a result, often takes on a less serious tack. But here at Monocle, the editorial floor is always busy with the September issue of Monocle and the autumn issue of Confect already in the works. To find out more, we talked to Monocle's editor Josh Fennett and contributing fashion editor Natalie Theodosi to discuss silly season and our out now summer newspaper Monocle, Med, Mountains and more.
Natalie Theodosi, you've got to get up very early in the morning to get a jump on the Monocle editors. We're deep into what some newspapers call silly season, but it feels like we haven't missed a beat here on the Monocle editorial floor. We've sent the September issue to press. We are working very hard on October. Lots of exciting things to come. I know you're working on Confect. But we're going to take a moment here to talk about our very beautiful Med, Mountains and More, Monocle's summer newspaper. And as our contributing editor for fashion, I wanted to hear some of your tips about dressing better this summer and what you decided to put on page in this beautiful Berliner format newspaper.
First of all, thank you for having me. As a Mediterranean, I'm always happy to talk about silly season, and I love always working on the newspaper. And this year we've got a special format. We've refreshed it, so it was really exciting. And I think when it comes to the fashion pages, we always go back to this idea of being more carefree. A lot of people talk about embodying a different part of their personality when it comes to summer dressing. So I really loved going and quizzing different creatives from different fields, architects, designers, on their summer style. So we've got an interesting mix of personalities from Patrick Johnson, who's a great tailor. He has a store in Sydney, which is where he's from, but also Savile Row here in London. He's opened recently. But what he was telling us is that in the summer, everything loosens up. He wears more silks. He swaps his loafers for sandals, still a polished look, but kind of he feels more relaxed. And that kind of kept coming up. And I love the idea of using fashion as kind of a transformation tool and to become a slightly different, more relaxed version of ourselves during this time of the year.
I love that. Who says you can't take silly season seriously? And is it possible to look elegant when you're feeling a little bit hot under the collar? What is it? A hand fan? Is it an unstructured blazer? What are the kind of secrets to looking cool, even if you don't feel cool this summer?
I think so. It's become more of a topic of a conversation, especially since we've had unusually high temperatures in the city as well. I was at Fashion Week in Paris when it was 40 degrees.
I was there too.
You were there too.
I was kind of hiding in the background with a cool, refreshing drink in hand.
So people had to really rethink how do they dress for professional events during such high temperatures when you can't really be in your short shorts and your bikini. And I think the answer is that keeping it simple, great fabrics. It has to be cotton, linen, natural fibers, especially in these high temperatures, really go a long way and then they make a difference. And a fan is now, I think someone was saying that in the same way that during the pandemic we had to wear masks, now we have to carry fans. I'm still kind of a proponent for the paper fans versus those automatic. Sorry.
Yeah, they don't look good, do they? Those
the electronic ones, the handheld electronic ones. I know maybe they work. I know it's hot, but it doesn't look great. I would go for something a little bit more elegant.
And they generate heat. And we are going to dive under the covers and just talk about one or two other stories. But I know our editorial director, Tyler Brulé, has a bugbear about this. Trainers in the heat, or are we looking for something a bit more structured? Can you wear a leather shoe in the heat, maybe a nice loafer? In the fashion crowd, I didn't see too many trainers. Have we seen the back of them?
We are seeing the back of them. It's really interesting, but there's so much more interest in loafers, both for summer and winter. I think there's different types of leathers that you can use. Espadrilles, it's a great choice. And I even think sandals in the city when it's that hot, as long as it's an elegant style that still kind of gives some kind of structure for the foot. It's a much better choice than trainers unless you're going on a run or to the gym.
You heard it here first. That's what to wear if you get invited to Monocle's party at Fashion Week. But the newspaper contains much, much more. It has our first ever glossy supplement, our nod to some of the magazines, I guess, Natalie, that inspire us, that talk about luxury in a meaningful way and realise that it's not just a fanciful thing. It's a choice people make to spend their money on things. It's a business, but it's also a business that we love talking about because very, very often you find people who are at the top of their game, whether it's in hospitality, design, architecture, your fashion pages, people who really care about what they do. Are there any other stories from the issue that caught your eye? Are you looking to check into the Mandarin Oriental in Mallorca? Are you going to nestle down with the thriller that we syndicated about murder in Paris in 1968? What other stories kind of caught your imagination?
I would love to check into the Mandarin Oriental in Mallorca. And actually, I always look at your hospitality pages and I think it's a different perspective to luxury, to what makes a good hotel, a good trip. So in a way, I'd love to hear from you as well, the kind of stories that you were really excited about, because you also work across, you oversee different sections and really focus on the hospitality. So what stood out to you as well?
Good question. I mean, one of the stranger tales that we tell, which I think is so Monocle, is our Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid went to Latakia, which is the biggest port in Syria, a Mediterranean port city. Obviously a huge regime change, a change in atmosphere and attitude in Syria. And he found a city in flux where a new tourism police are kind of policing modesty. but in a kind of strange two-tier way to allow secular people to enjoy the beach in bikinis in private beach clubs, and to allow Muslim families to enjoy smoking a shisha pipe and having a picnic on the beach. So a place in flux, a city in flux, and perhaps for many, particularly for many people across the region who before the Assad regime fell, wouldn't have dreamed of going to Syria, are now seeing it as a Mediterranean destination. So I don't imagine that everyone who picks up a copy of Med, Mountains and More will be booking a holiday in Latakia. But something amazing about Monocle, we try and show people beyond the horizon. We try and show people places they might not know, and we try and tell a story that's both intensely local about a place, but that tells you about something broader that's going on in the world. And Inzi's trip to Syria certainly did that, and sums up maybe the seriousness that can come with silly season if you do it right and if you look for the stories that matter.
Josh Fennett and Natalie Theodosi there talking about our summer newspaper, Monocle, Med, Mountains and More. Don't forget you can buy your very own copy today, or subscribe online as well. But that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, and thanks to the producers, Chris Chermack, Thomas Waterhouse and Desiree Bandley. Our researcher was Kenny Martin, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance by Hunter Wang. After the headlines, more music's on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London, and The Globalist is back tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.